All right, my friends. Once again, I miss you. It's been a long spring break, although I'm sure it was a good one. And I am getting my shot today, so I'll see you tomorrow. Today should be for you, March 14th. It should be that for me too, but it's actually March. I don't know. What's today, Pat? Today's March 6th when I'm actually recording this because I'm trying to get things done ahead of time for you. Best way to do things. But anyway, let's go ahead and start the chapter on the American Revolution. At the start of the American Revolution, the obstacles seem to be quite impossible. When you stop and you think about this, how could the small ragtag militias, there wasn't even an army in existence yet, even think about fighting with the huge British Empire? I mean, stop and think about what happened at Lexington and Concord when we read April Morning. So it seemed impossible. There was no central government in April of 1775, so there seemed to be no way to raise an army, much less train, supply, or pay them, a national army, that is. At this point, most American colonists, historians estimate about 2/3 of them, still opposed having a war. And on top of that, how in the world could the 13 still separate colonies really come together to defeat their huge mother country? It seemed overwhelming. All right, so let's talk about early battles of the Revolutionary War. Remember that this is the introduction to the chapter, so I'll go over into some of these a little more in depth in the coming lectures. Anyway, the early battles of the Revolutionary War saw us in 1775 with the best way of describing those battles as British military victories, but they were also American morale boosters. And that was possibly more important than the military victories. The British defeated the Minutemen. Remember that the Minutemen are the colonial militia at Lexington. But the colonists surprised them, as we know, by using very effective sniper fire on them as they returned to Boston from Concord. In fact, they were so ferocious that the British were stunned, even though they were bigger, better supplied, and more used to fighting. June 1775 did see the colonists lose at Bunker Hill, but the Americans took down a significant number of redcoats, and that gave them a moral victory. So that's the early war. The picture on the left is a statue in Concord, Massachusetts, and it shows a Minuteman. They were called Minutemen because the New England farmers had to be ready to fight in a minute. Okay, so the militia were made up of Minutemen. Makes sense? And then the picture on the right, I think I said the other one was on the left. Who knows? You all know I have to look at my ring to even know what I'm doing. But anyway, the painting on the right was done by John Trumbull, and it's the Battle of Bunker Hill. And it says the Battle of Bunker Hill was not a military victory for the colonial forces, but it served as an important morale booster. The colonists inflicted heavy casualties on the larger, more powerful British forces, and that stunned the British forces. So let's continue with military versus moral victories. In 1776, we see George Washington lead his forces to two surprising wins at the battles of Trenton and Princeton. Both of these are in New Jersey, even as the British are occupying New York, which is nearby, very nearby. However, in 1777, the British occupied Philadelphia and sent the members of the Second Continental Congress into hiding. The British pretty much controlled New York, the seaway along the eastern coast, because the colonists did not yet have a navy, and they were attacking from Canada into the northern part of New York. This was starting to isolate the New England colonies from the rest of the colonies, so things weren't looking good. But with Saratoga and Valley Forge, we see the tide turn in favor of the Patriots. October of 1777 saw the British surrendering to General Horatio Gates at the Battle of Saratoga in the Hudson River Valley of northern New York. That's going to open up the ability for New England to get involved, or to at least not feel isolated, because isolating Boston would have been very bad in terms of morale. General Washington quartered. Remember, quartered means put your troops up. Well, he didn't put them up in houses. He quartered his troops in the frozen fields of Valley Forge, where when he had to retreat from Philadelphia. Remember that the British controlled Philadelphia. But the important point to him moving his troops to Valley Forge is that he didn't surrender. However, that was kind of strange that he didn't surrender because there was no foreign aid coming in. They hadn't made any deals with anybody to help them. And in the beginning of 1778, though, France does ally itself with the Patriots, recognizes American independence, and sends military troops and a huge amount of gunpowder. This changes everything. And for the British, this is a new type of war, and they don't know how to deal with it. The British were humiliated by Gates and his troops at Saratoga. And even though they had captured the capital at Philadelphia, because Philadelphia was the capital at this point, it didn't help them. It didn't help them because the American Continental Army, along with the state militias, the state armies, they just stayed in the field and kept on fighting. They weren't impressed. The British could not understand an enemy that kept on fighting, regardless of the damage that the British had done to their cities and their own personal private property. They simply could not defeat the Patriots' morale. So the British thought, well, okay, maybe we can get the loyalists in the southern colonies to support us. Well, that doesn't work out either. And on top of that, they're afraid that the French might send their navy to support the colonists. So things are changing, and the British just kind of don't know how to handle it. And then we see a stunning defeat in October of 1781 because General Cornwallis, British commander, was forced to surrender at Yorktown, Virginia, because his troops were surrounded. And okay, I'm having a brain moment. He does surrender to George Washington, right, Pat? Yeah, he said correct. Okay, so he surrendered. That famous painting by John Trumbull. George is on my mind, obviously. In the middle of the slide, you see the famous painting that John Trumbull did with the light coming in from God, quote unquote, in the left there, shining toward the American side. And you see George Washington on the white horse, because of course, if you're riding a white horse, you're the savior. And he is being surrendered to by Lord Cornwallis, who is standing below him on the ground. Notice that even the horses are bowing to George Washington. This painting, if you are ever privileged to see it, hangs in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It is 12 feet by 18 feet. Remember, we have to have our national celebrations and symbols too. Anyway, going on from there, so we see that defeat. That pretty much ends the war. And in 1783, once again in Paris, we have the Treaty of Paris, which sees the British officially recognizing the United States of America as an independent country. Now, and I'll talk more about what's in that treaty later on in this chapter. This is the second Treaty of Paris, by the way. Remember that those treaties are 20 years apart. We have the Treaty of Paris in 1763 that ends the French and Indian War and essentially leads to, quite frankly, the Revolution, because of some of the things that came out of the French and Indian War, like, yeah, you fought for all this land in the Ohio Valley, and we're not going to let you have any of it. And it leads us all the way to the Treaty of Paris in 1783, when Britain has to say, sorry, I guess we really did you wrong, and now you are the U.S. of A. All right, you know what to do. Please find a partner, collaborate, write your questions, write your answers. And I'll see you tomorrow.